lining the tunnel, uh, reducing any chances of little fragment collapses. So that's why they're going to line the tunnel. I think they're going to shorten it by 20 or 30 feet also at one end on the west end. It also includes the culvert work on what has become known as, I forget the name they gave the creek. It's like Andover Junction Creek, which is kind of neat. But it's the Hudson Farm culvert. In fact, I took a picture. I should send that to Richie so we could add it. And it also it includes the two culverts that have been so controversial. And this construction apparently is going to pay a little attention to the bats that were the hang up for all this time. But truthfully, the hang up of all this time was kind of driven by the funding for the tunnel, because NJ Transit, they've got 12 starts they're working on, and none of these new services will work until they can get more trains into New York City. The capacity in New York is full, and the trains are arriving before the platform clears. But now that the tunnel has been approved and Portal Bridge has been approved, and the politicians are all on board with getting all this started, magically the contract appears for the tunnel. So we're well on our way to getting the cutoff service, at least to Andover for NJ Transit, and things are looking very good on the Amtrak side for service to Scranton. Same thing, the politicians are lining up. There have been discussions with NJT and everybody involved. Lackawanna County's on board. The Pennsylvania Northeast Railroad Authority paid for the Amtrak study, which is going on now, and so things are going very well on that end. How you doing, Rich?
Keep going. Looks like Nick's. Oh, never mind.
Okay. Well, there's okay.
All right, you're good.
More to talk about. Both F40s are back in service in NJ Transit, and the fans who are trackside are having a ball, catching the old units, meeting the new units. I've seen pictures of the newest of the new ones, and the new dual modes are entering service at a slow rate, but they are entering service. So the more of them that are in service, the fewer we're going to see of the GP40s. The F40s, some of the mechanics at NJT tell me the F40s are probably going to be among the last to be retired. NJ Transit likes the full-bodied units, and every part on those F40s is replaceable. They're very simple engines, just like our F3s. So they'll run as long as NJ Transit wants them running. So right now the Forsythia is out, and the spring buds are popping. So it's a good time to be line side, getting pictures of the end of the last of the GP40s and F40s on NJ Transit.
All right, cool. Thanks, Mike. All right, now what everyone's been waiting for here. So Nick Ozarak is here with us tonight. So Nick is pretty well known at this point as the host of the Roundhouse podcast. He is also the owner of Streamliner Media, a media services company that specializes in filmmaking and graphic and web design. So Nick, I know you've hosted some stuff about URHS and Tri-State in the past on the Roundhouse, which we're greatly appreciative of, and we're greatly appreciative of you coming tonight to give us a presentation. So the floor is yours, sir.
Yes, thank you. And it's great to be with you guys tonight. It's good to be back with Tri-State virtually. I say that because I haven't been out to your location physically yet, but having had you guys on the show before, I think most recently when you were running the 19 campaign, it's always a treat to be connected and hopefully get to do some more collaborations in the future. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Ozarak, and it's a pleasure to be talking about something that has been a true creative drive of mine for the past several years, and that is the Roundhouse. And the people behind the trains is what we are going to be looking at, because podcasting is about stories. So with that in mind, this is the audience participation section of tonight's presentation. So if you can put in just type in the comments, what is necessary to make a compelling story? any story. What are some key ingredients? Feel free to leave some chat responses, and I'll pick out some of your ones there while you are leaving your thoughts as to what the key ingredients are. Here we have an image of Tim Sposato, who's the Chief Mechanical Officer of Age of Steam Roundhouse. You'll see a number, the images that I've included in the presentation tonight are a lot of the cover arts that I've used for different episodes, most of which are my artwork, and of those, a number are available as prints. Not sure if I've seen any of let me see. Okay, so Rick says a dynamic ranging cast of characters. Yes, and so that is a very key ingredient. So keep answering that. The other question I will put out there is based on this idea of characters. What is key? What is a key component to characters in a story? And I'll let you leave your comments for that. But while I'm waiting to see some responses trickle in, as Richie said, I'm the host of the Roundhouse podcast, which I've been doing since February of 2015. I'm pleased to say we are now up to 119 episodes, 118 publicly, but the latest episode is available to Patreon supporters. Now, I'm going to be talking about a lot of my different entities. That includes the Roundhouse podcast, Streamliner Media. And so what I've done, rather than inundate you with a ton of links, is I've created a link tree link, which is one link you go to and you'll see all links for the podcast, recommended episodes, everything you need in one spot. And that link will be at the end of this presentation too. Charisma, Leon says charisma for characters. John Galt, uncommon people doing uncommon good. Deborah, the interactions between the characters, all good ingredients. And Nick Martin, a wide variety of perspectives and viewpoints. Yes, all of these are good things. And all of you are hinting at where I intend to go. But the thing that I put as a key ingredient that I felt was a good theme for what we'll be discussing tonight is that good stories need character arcs. You need a sense of growth, that especially with your protagonist, that person is starting one place and growing to something bigger and better. And we'll be talking about that because at the heart of what I'm doing is podcasting, is storytelling, and these stories are about people. And I feel like a good place to start is to talk about my own story. So I was born and raised in Meadville, Pennsylvania. And for, I suppose, a good frame of reference, given the audience tonight, is that I was right along the Erie-Lackawanna main line, though by the time I was born, it was Conrail and what was left of the EL main line. And now part of the Western New York and Pennsylvania Railroad, hence the image of the MLWs in the bottom right. That said, being that my father was Canadian, French Canadian, and grew up in Ottawa in the 50s and 60s, that meant I was raised on a very steady diet of Canadian Pacific and Canadian National. I'm a musician, a lifelong musician, played a variety of instruments. These days, I mostly am playing accordion. I had the pleasure of playing in a Scottish country dance band for a number of years. I've been a train simulator enthusiast, loved train computer games ever since I was about 5 years old, and I got my first copy of Lionel Traintown. Feel free to shout out in the chat if you guys remember Lionel Traintown. Still holds up after all these years. And the software is progressive, but we'll get into that in a bit. I've also had the pleasure of serving as a board member for two nonprofits, the French Creek Valley Railroad Historical Society, based in my hometown of Meadville, and the Friends of the East Broad Top, which you may have been hearing a thing or two about the East Broad Top in recent history. And I am also a filmmaker and a podcaster. But how did I become, first and foremost, a filmmaker. Well, so I mentioned train simulators, and my entry point with train simulators, Microsoft Train Simulator came out when I was about 10. And that was initially just a fun place to crash trains virtually. You start it up, you'd run the trains, they'd crash. Yay, fun. But as I became older and more sophisticated in taste, perhaps, or at the very least spent more time with them, I developed a huge appreciation for the history that a lot of these different these simulations were trying to recreate. Everything from an interurban Canadian railroad back in the 1920s in the form of London and Port Stanley, to a short line that became a favorite of mine, a New York short line called the Fonda, Johnstown, and Gloversville, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And because I was becoming more versed in railroad history, especially with these train simulator routes, I tried to find a way to take something, trains and railroads, that meant so much to me and communicate what that meant to a wider audience. And so out of that was born my first digital creation, which was At the Rail Yard, a virtual railroading review series where I would review different train simulator products as far as how immersive they were, how scenic they were, what all was included when you would get the route and the different rolling stock. But I tried to do it in a way that made sure that these reviews weren't just cut and dried affairs of just detail, but I wanted to make them experiences. And perhaps none is a better example of that than this video here, which I'm going to show you the intro of, which was the Donner Pass and the storm of 1952. And I am going to let a 11-year younger version of myself narrate that and open those events.
California digs out after the worst series of blizzards in 50 years.
On January 10th of 1952, Donner Pass was hit by one of the fiercest storms in its history. On the 13th, the westbound passenger liner, City of San Francisco, struggled on as wind speeds climbed to 100 miles per hour. Then at Yuba Pass, the train froze to a halt. For the next 6 days, rescuers worked hard to free the train from its prison of ice, using the Southern Pacific's strong rotary snowplows to forge through the humongous drifts of snow. However, things didn't always go according to plan. Derailments and equipment failures plagued the operation. Even once crews finally reached the train, there was the challenge of digging it out and dealing with the other pieces of equipment that had failed in the process. How effectively can Microsoft Train Simulator tell the tale of the storm of 1952? We'll put it through its paces at the rail yard. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense as far as what my part of what my style was. Obviously going for a very big and dramatic. At the Rail Yard as a whole, and you can find episodes of this on my YouTube channel, which again will be linked in the link tree, was a really great sandbox for me to try a variety of different musical styles paired with different styles of editing, depending on the prototype and the era. And it was a great way of getting used to this idea of storytelling. But as I encountered more stories like this, where there's something really compelling about this, and especially the stories of individuals, I wanted to evolve beyond just the format of At the Rail Yard. And so that led to pressing the same video again. That led to the Roundhouse podcast. And in February 2015, I embarked on that adventure, and it has been so much fun. So first off, in terms of saying I'm going to create a podcast, is finding the guests, determining who are going to be interesting people / organizations to have on the show. So where I source these interviews from, or these people from, there's a wide range of different approaches. So one of the slogans with the podcast, every time I open an episode, I'll say, welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozrak, and this is episode such and such of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby, you name it, and we discuss it. So you can see me getting into my podcaster voice there. That you name it and we discuss it part is where people say, hey, you should talk to this person. So examples of that, I've had the pleasure of talking to Steve Sandberg of the Milwaukee Road 261 crew, as well as Rich Melvin of Nickel Plate 765. Sometimes there are people that I seek out based on knowing that this is a subject that I want to cover. So the O. Winston Link Museum, I had the pleasure of having Lindsay Alley on the show, who also came into Tri-State. I did a wonderful presentation for the group that I really enjoyed. It's so much fun to have different people on a different context, because then you learn so much. And talking to her about Link's body of work. Appalachian Railroad Modeling is Dan Burke. He is a blogger who for the past 20 years has been creating model railroad track plans, but these are heavily researched, usually based on Appalachian prototypes, and he hand draws them, and they're really nice. Jet Powered Train, the story of New York Central M497, as you see in the lower right, the RDC that topped out over 180 miles an hour. Got to interview Don Wetzel, who was the engineer for that project. I should say the late Don Wetzel, may he rest in peace. I was so happy to have him on the show. And the Scrapper Who Saved Steam. I'm going to talk about that one a little bit, because that's one of my recommended episodes. Sometimes people will reach out of the blue and contact me and say, hey, we think that you would like talking to somebody from our company or somebody related to an initiative we're doing. Examples, Stacy Walters Naffa, the president of Walters Trains, one of the communications people with Walters, reached out to me and asked if she could come on the show. And she was a great guest. I really enjoyed having her on. Mighty Trains was one of those travelogue train series. And the production company reached out to me and asked if I could interview the host of that show, so that they'd have a chance to promote it through that avenue. And he was super cool and super nice. And then sometimes you just get plain lucky, as is the case with Wick Moorman. Wick was on my 2 interview lists pretty much since day one. I knew that I wanted Wick Moorman, but how does one get Wick Moorman? He is, after all, Wick Moorman. So I'll tell you how. Well, because fortunately, I was on the board of the Friends of the East Broad Top right before, yes, I'd been on the board for like a year or so before the big announcement in February 2020 came out. But I had a heads up of what was going to happen on Valentine's Day. So I was invited to join in the festivities at Orbisonia. And so, of course, all of the EBT Foundation board members were there, and that included Wick Moorman. So I get to shake his hand and I get to ask him if he'll be on my show. And he says, sure, this is my email. And he tells me what his email address is. And then I thank him. Bunch of festivities, bunch of things go on during the day. And then later he comes up and says, he's talking to somebody else, but he passes me. He says, "Now you remember the email I gave you, right?" And I said, "Oh yes, it's this." And he said, "Yep, you got it," which I really appreciated. It says so much about this guy that he's a super big deal, as if I needed to tell you that. But he remembered who I was enough to remember that I'd asked him to interview. And so he was a 2-part episode, one part talking about his Norfolk Southern career and the other about Amtrak. And oh, what a guy. What a guy. I mean, they just don't always make him like that. He's a super cool guy. So once I have a guest lined up, then comes the point of interviewing them. And it'd be very easy to think of the interview process as just drawing up questions, typing up questions, and then reading them off in a list form. And certainly I'm coming into the interview with questions in mind, but there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's a way in which I've learned to kind of balance being in the conversation while being around it. And what I mean by that is when I'm doing an interview for the podcast, on the one hand, there is an element to it where it's a normal conversation. I'm asking a person questions and they're giving me answers. But I'm aware that I'm doing this for an audience. Yes, I can edit it, but I still want to make sure that it's entertaining, that we're not finding ourselves going down niche rabbit holes that aren't going to be interesting to other people. So it's a balancing act in terms of getting the right mixture of into the details, but also making sure that enough of their story is covered. And as I say here, everyone has a story to tell. I am a firm believer that it doesn't matter who you are, how quote unquote important you may feel you are, or you're standing with an organization. Everybody has a story to tell. And my goal as the interviewer is to facilitate an environment in which you, the guest, are comfortable and able to share your story. And to me, part of that deal is the guest sets the terms, that they get to take the conversation where they see fit. I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm not trying to pry out secrets or details of things that make people uncomfortable. That's not what I am. I'm an interviewer. I'm mindful of trying to make the person comfortable so they could share what they need to share and making sure that they feel comfortable doing so. Some guests come to the show and they're super polished. They're used to being interviewed. They know how to get their sound bites out. They know how to get their shout outs for whatever they're trying to promote. Other people are much newer to the process, and as a result might need a bit more facilitating. So it's recognizing how to get them to explore ideas further with the right follow-up questions and where to take it and make sure that they feel comfortable. And number 3, it's their perspective. Even if I don't agree with the guest, they have the right to share their opinion as they see it, so long as it's not something hateful. But that's not something I've really encountered on the show. A good example of what I'm describing here, and this one I can name because this is one that pertains to a president of an organization that's now like 2 presidents down the road from him. So I think it's safe to say that the leadership's changed. But so I interviewed Charlie Getz, who at the time, this was, I think, mid-2016, was the president of the National Model Railroad Association, NMRA. And in interviewing, I asked him about his perspective on approaching young people with regards to the hobby, how to get young people involved. And he literally said that it was not the NMRA's position to recruit young people. Like his goal and his vision for it was to get retirees and older adults. He felt the youth were a lost cause. Now, That's a perspective you may disagree with. It's obviously a perspective I disagree with as a 31-year-old model railroader, or back then late 20s. But and I could have challenged him. I could have pushed him on that, and maybe I did a bit. But I could have really debated heavily with him on that, but I chose not to because I don't need to. If I want to take the stand and make my views known on why I think it's approachable to young people, I could make a special episode to that. I'm not there to prove I'm right. I'm there to have Charlie Getz as a guest. And that's the key distinction, is that, people are free to agree or disagree with him as they see fit, but it's his perspective. And I had to honor that. And again, the reason I name him is because now they're 2 presidents down the way. I think the NMRA has shifted their focus a bit. I know that their current president's a younger chap, so this is not in any way meant to slight the NMRA or any of the chapters who obviously are doing their own thing, but just an example of this illustrated. So the technical element of what I do with the podcast, first, there's the recording. Most of my interviews are done virtually, like we are doing right here now through Zoom. Skype, which perhaps has dated these a bit, because admittedly, most of us are not using Skype anymore, but once in a while, I'll still fire it up. And Google Hangouts for virtual interviews. Those are my main tools. I should make a point to say, Richie's already typed this in the comments, but if any of you have questions for me, feel free to put them in the comments, and then Richie will read them back to me at the end. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. For when I go out on location, and we're going to talk about some of the location episodes coming up, I have a Zoom H4n audio recorder as pictured in the upper right, and that's something that I find is really flexible. It's a decent microphone for something that's a built-in microphone. It has ports, as you can see at the bottom, for XLR inputs for your audio tech folk. You can plug in extra microphones. It's wonderful. It's seen me through a number of episodes, and the quality is not as good as what we got here. What we got here is my handy dandy Samson CO1U USB microphone, and that's what I use for pretty much everything that's studio based. Actually, that's what you heard all the way back in that Stroma 52 clip. So it's kept me well through the years. Then once the interview is recorded, I edit these in Adobe Audition, which you can kind of see an example of the timeline on the screen here, or of what the projects end up looking like. So obviously the purple chunk is the guest, the little bits of green are me, and then you have little bits of sound effects, intro and outros, and that kind of thing. I'm also using Audacity, which is a free program. When I'm recording virtually, I'll have one program recording my microphone and another program recording the guest that's coming in through speakers or headphones. And then it's a matter of putting together the cover art, because the podcast is an audio experience, but the images are key to selling that. The images are what people see on Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. So they are a key component to the creative process of this. I tend to go with usually one image, just a good picture that illustrates the concept. But occasionally I'll get artsy fartsy, depending on what I'm trying to illustrate. It might do something more collagey. So here we have just a nice image of Age of Steam inside the Roundhouse. Yay, me staying true to my love of Canadian Pacific and G5 Pacifics in particular. But up here we have Appalachian model railroading. The cover image for this is a mixture of a couple of photos from his website with a ton of different track plans just overlaid over those images. And then we also have the Great Train Robbery of the 1960s, showing some different images to convey that. And also, now's a good time to mention, for a number of these images, I have prints available for purchase. You'll see that in the link tree. And these are printed locally to where I live in Central Virginia. I sign them, I mail them to you. So they're each one of a kind in their own way. Event episodes. Occasionally, I will be invited to participate or experience some kind of special event and cover that for the podcast. These are usually episodes that have a multitude of different interviews and perspectives while going out on the road, while using that Zoom H4n recorder. Some of the ones that are worth highlighting here: Steampunk Unlimited, Strasburg Railroad, as some of you may have been familiar with, for a while hosted an event. It was a steampunk festival. It was incredible. It was honestly, and I say this to challenge those of you who are in events, and especially rail preservation events, to raise the bar further. But I do think that was probably the best rail event that I've been to as far as a whole weekend, because it had people dressed up in steampunk characters. It was this wonderful melding between the rail fan community and the steampunk community, and the steampunk community has so much creativity. I was sitting in a dining car on the train for one of their Victorian dinner events. Everybody on that car was dressed up. Every single passenger. It was so immersive, and you had music and you had vendors. It was wonderful. So that is probably my number one. And I say this having not experienced your wonderful Hickory Creek, New York Central excursions. So I'm open to having that challenge. The Oil Creek and Titusville World War II weekend. This is close to where I live in, or used to live in, northwestern Pennsylvania. The Oil Creek and Titusville Railroad, which local tri-state tie-in would be that they run a lot of Erie, their passenger cars are ex Erie Lackawanna electrics, multiple units. So they have this World War II weekend event that they do every year where they invite reenactors. The image that you see here on the right was of a bunch of Allied soldiers who had taken over the train, defending it from the Axis powers who were around the grounds, to be on a moving train with reenactors firing around you and yelling, "Get down, get down." Well, it's like, this is fake, but it feels so real. It was quite fun. It was really well done. And last but not least, the Joliet rocket. Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society back in 2017 and 2018 held a series of excursions with nickel plate 765 running trips from Joliet to downtown Chicago, including with the Hickory Creek. And everything about this event was to a T. It was all about creating that mainline steam feel, including, and I give Kelly and his team immense credit for this, the idea of making sure to incentivize people dressing up. So riding these vintage passenger cars with people dressed up for the time was phenomenal. Getting to downtown Chicago, arriving in the middle of Chicago, hearing 765 echo off the skyscrapers. Oh, and my favorite bit, I got to live out a lifelong dream with this one. I got to do a station announcement. I got to announce the departure of the Joliet rocket. It was so good. It was so good. I had it in my mind that as like a high school prank, I would come over my school's PA and do a fake station announcement. Never got to do it, but I got to do a real one for the Joliet rocket. That was so much fun. I'm going to play you a little snippet of the episode. I had fun with this one. Most of the time, the interviews are very straightforward, as you would expect, in terms of, I'm speaking like my normal self, and my guests are speaking like their normal selves. For this one, Kelly collaborated with me on this, and he said, can you make it sound like a period broadcast? Can you make it sound vintage? So what I ended up doing was a mixture of interviews, and the interviews in the episode are done straight, but there's little interludes that I add that have that vintage 1940s newsreel flavor. I'm going to play you the intro to the episode, and you'll see what I mean.
Today on the Roundhouse, we are proud to present the inaugural run of a railroad excursion unlike any other. From the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society comes the Joliet Rocket, the future of rail transportation built on the traditions of steel and steam. Starring none other than Nickel Plate Road number 765. This marvelous product of the Lima Locomotive Works will once again prove its might as it prepares to whisk us from Joliet, Illinois to the windy city of Chicago at speeds of 60 miles per hour. Behind it are several coaches, lounges, and domes full of eager passengers awaiting the journey of a lifetime. Simply put, there's nothing like this on any other railroad in the country, and you will be along for the ride.
So that was fun. And don't worry, if the voice grates on you a bit too much, again, I only did it for interludes, but it was a nice change of pace creatively to do something like that. So some of the episodes that I would recommend listening to, and these are all going to be in the link that I'll be sharing with you at the end, include Dr. Robin Coombs' thesis on Heritage Railway and the future. We'll talk more about that in a bit. The Scrapper Who Saved Steam, which is the story of the Barry Island Scrapyard in the UK, which collected over 200, I think nearly about 280 steam locomotives. And of those, 220 survive today in preservation. I think it's 223. And we get to hear from somebody who studied this miraculous event and researched it heavily about how that took place. Really fantastic story of preservation. Steampunk Unlimited, which I mentioned earlier. And fitting enough, when talking about 765, Kelly Lynch, who was our most recent guest as of March 2022, our most recent guest on the show. And Kelly did a phenomenal job for reasons that I will get to in a moment. So all of this gathering stories and the work that I do on the podcast is part of a larger picture of things called Streamliner Media. I launched this company a couple of years ago. As with many folks, I previously worked for an aerospace manufacturer as their communications person. And when COVID hit, not that many folks are communications people for aerospace manufacturers, but when COVID hit, like many other people, I was let go from my job. And so I decided that that was what I needed to, that was the kick in the pants I needed to try and see if I could make my own business work, and hence Streamliner Media. Because while my focus had shifted to podcasting in terms of my trained digital content, I was still creating films. I went to Allegheny College for filmmaking, and I was still doing odd freelance jobs here and there. And then a series of fortunate coincidences led to some really fantastic jobs that gave me the boost to say, you know what, I'm going to try to make this work. I'm going to go for this as my full-time occupation. So my primary focus is video, but I do photography, I do graphic design, web site building, and of course, podcasting. With video, I consider that to be my prime offering. And there's a lot of different elements to that specialty. Because I know train so well, I feel that I have skills to offer in understanding how they work, how to film around them and be safe, but relate that to a general public, which comes in handy when it comes to highlighting businesses, highlighting tourist railroads, showcasing properties, as well as a new market, if you will, which is infrastructure projects. There's this huge push, especially in the short line world, for grants, for public-private partnership to do track rehabilitation and bridge construction. And so I've had the pleasure of working with companies like Iowa Interstate, Georgia Florida Railroad, which is an Omnitrax property, and Pioneer Lines to do projects that showcase infrastructure. So one of these I'm going to share with you now, which is a video that I did on the Georgia and Florida Railway, located in, you guessed it, Georgia and Florida.
The project at hand is a 81-mile rehab between Perry, Florida and Adel, Georgia. It encompasses 108,000 cross-tie replacements, over 120 highway grade crossing improvements, 15 bridge improvements, 81 miles of surfacing. We dumped approximately 11,000 tons of ballast, retired 15 turnouts, rehab 21 turnouts, and overall this was an $18 million partnership between Taylor County, Florida and Omnitrax through a cyber grant in the partnership with the FRA.
We worked very closely with Secretary Chow and her team, the Department of Transportation, to get $8.25 million to this county, which was then matched by the owners of this railroad. This rail is currently supporting principally a pulp mill, which has a lot of very heavyweight pulp. And that connects, this rail connects Perry, not only with the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. Vitally important for this community, where hundreds of jobs emanate from the mill.
Maintaining service was critical. Without our timely delivery of rail cars, it was likely that we could shut that plant down. Both of us, Taylor County and Omnitrax, continued to maintain a very smooth working relationship. We're open to the suggestions of the FRA. We had a business case pretty much every time a question came up. We'd already developed that business case, developed the research. We showed what teamwork can do in a private-public partnership.
We're fortunate to have the Georgia-Florida Railway very, very involved in this project, because they are literally rebuilding their railroad and bringing it up to the standards of the future. It's not just what we need today, it's what we're going to need tomorrow. Nothing's more fundamental than hauling freight over the rail. It's vital to America's economy, and it's vital to the economy of this county.
An investment is paramount to our successes, not only on this line, but on all of our properties. It's a testament to what Omnitrax stands for as a company, to deliver this kind of a project under budget, ahead of schedule, and to give back to the county, especially Taylor County, that went above and beyond to help secure such a positive investment for our infrastructure.
We all know that infrastructure in America needs a lot of work. This is where it starts.
So there's two elements to storytelling that I wish to highlight with that. One is the fact, I guess I'll just click through into so one piece of that is the idea of well, fittingly enough, here I was 11 years ago creating At the Rail Yard and trying to figure out how to edit trains and big epic music together to create something that would be entertaining. And that's a skill that now I'm using at present that has real world implications. The ability for these railroads to show in an exciting manner what this infrastructure, these public funds are doing, is critical on so many different fronts. And then in the context of the video itself, there's this idea of illustrating that this is a conversation between two entities. You have the company representative, you have the congressman in there, and they're talking back and forth. It's very deliberate that if you notice this, they're looking at each other in how I framed the shots, because I want it to be a conversation. I want to illustrate that idea of conversation. And there's this narrative of, here we have a problem, and here we worked to find a solution or create a solution. And so that storytelling mentality crosses so much more than you might otherwise assume. How is the podcast financially possible? Well, first and foremost, to the generosity of my patrons who support me over on Patreon. For those of you unfamiliar with it, Patreon is a subscription service that allows creators to incentivize donations on a regular basis by way of providing perks. So for the Roundhouse podcast, what that means is that for as little as $1 a month, you're going to supporting the show. You're making it possible for me to go out on the road and do episodes. And for that $1, you get a shout out both on this series. So if you signed up today, which that's great if you do, you'll get a shout out in the May episode of the Roundhouse. You at $5 a month, you're getting early access to episodes a week in advance. $10 a month, you're getting access to an exclusive online hangout, and at $25 a month, you're getting a free photo print. These photos that you've been seeing, including, this is one of my favorites here that I wanted to share in this context of the Strasbourg engines. You could get this. You could either just buy the print, but if you support on Patreon, you'll get that print within the first month of subscribing. Also through sponsorships, both from, and I've had sponsorships from a number of companies right now running ads for, as of right now being April 2022, we're running ads for Strasbourg Railroad and Age of Steam Roundhouse. What I have grown the most, what I've gotten the most out of in terms of doing the podcast is that it's really facilitated what I'd call my life as a railroad nomad, in the sense of being able to explore all these different sub niches of the hobby and the rail preservation industry and understanding it so much more. I love going down rabbit holes and learning about new railroads or new things, new computer games, new board games. I'm always trying to find that new thing. So LARP, some of you may be familiar with it. It's an acronym for live action role play. If you Google searched it now, mostly what you would find is fantasy LARP, think Lord of the Rings, but there is a sub niche of LARP that's dedicated to not railroad. I wish there was. We're hoping that happens, but dedicated to historical LARP. This idea of kind of like reenactment, but you're not recreating an event per se. You're sort of making it up. I want to see a railroad LARP. If any of you want to see a railroad LARP too, talk to me. I want to make that a thing. I have ideas. Train simulator, and I actually interviewed a guy on the podcast, a guy by the name of Klaus, who created a Downton Abbey style LARP where he and his crew rented out a castle in Denmark, and they pretended for a long weekend that it was Downton Abbey with nobility and maids and butlers and like, you think of Downton Abbey, this was a live version of that. No script. It's not theater. It's you go into this and you're a character. I could talk way too long about LARP. Look it up. Actually, look it up on the Roundhouse podcast and listen to Klaus's interview, because he provides a really good intro to what it's about, as well as talking about his specific event. Train simulation is, I think, a key piece to what was the magic bridge between rail fanning being something that I did with my dad to something that was a core part of my own identity. That was something that I did not just to connect with him, but for my own sake. The virtual realities that are being created are phenomenal. Most recently, there's a new game sweeping the nation called Railroads Online. And yes, you guessed it, I interviewed the developers of that way back in December, so not that way back, about creating an 1880s train simulator, narrow gauge train simulator that has multiplayer and has the ability to both create your network, lay your tracks, connect industries, and run the trains. It is phenomenally fun. And board games. I had the pleasure of interviewing the creator, Tony Boydell, of this game you see here called Snowdonia, which is a competitive game where players are creating the Snowdon Mountain Railway, which is you can see images of the real one in Wales. It's a cog railway, but you're competing for points. So it's one track being laid, but think of it like you're independent contractors and you're trying to get the most work done so you get the most money. There's a whole weather dynamic. So it was really fun to talk to him about how to create a train board game. I love these adventures. I love learning new things. And anytime you come to me and say, hey, Nick, this thing's really cool, you got to check it out, please do. My contact info is on the roundhousepodcast.com, also in the link tree at the end. I'm always enjoying seeing what the next generation will do. What are ways in which people are finding new avenues to connect rail fandom and rail preservation with new technology or just new ways of thinking. And a good segue point is learning more about how critical the people are, not just the equipment. Now, a lot of the exploration that's come with doing the podcast has been a great deal of fun. I've met so many people. I've made so many friends. I've learned so much. And next month you'll be having Tri-State. You guys will be having Rick Kafuri on, and I'm so glad that I got to meet him. He reached out to me to do an episode on his book about Steamtown, and it was a pleasure to have him on the show. I got to meet him in person last summer. So there's so many wonderful things, but those of us in rail preservation know that there's things that are really difficult that we really don't want to talk about, but frankly, we should. Water break. And I think it's that there's these difficult conversations, and it's always the struggle of who wants to break the ice and who wants to worry about offending that person, so forth. So an interesting adventure that I found myself on this past year of 2021 is International Women's Day, which is in early March. Strasburg Railroad was advertising the fact that they were having an all-female locomotive crew for International Women's Day. And the comments were disappointing. Not entirely, of course, but you had very cringe comments about women drivers, and you had, oh, isn't that hot? I'm talking about the steam engine, tee hee hee. And that in and of itself, I get it. You can't dwell too much on the internet comments, but it wasn't just internet comments. I learned enough to know there's probably more to this than we're looking at. So I conducted a survey through the podcast where I asked women to participate and answer two simple questions. Number one, have you ever experienced any sort of discrimination or harassment in your career or volunteering in rail preservation? Over 24 responded, a few of whom said no, And the second question was, what advice would they offer as to how to improve the environment in general? And so a few did not have issues, but a number did. And there's an episode where I read some of the responses, and the full responses, if you search in the show notes of that episode, you can see the full survey results, so you can read all the responses, and they are really disheartening. I released this. I was met with a lot of praise, a lot of support. I was met with a lot of backlash. I was accused of lazy and unprofessional journalism. People were trying to tease little Nick, like really childish stuff. It was very enlightening, and not in a good way. And I have to be honest, I really smiled at the people that I made upset, because my philosophy with that is, well, if I'm making you upset, it's because I'm probably making you uncomfortable. And maybe if you're uncomfortable about this issue of sexism, you got to be asking yourself questions. I'm not, and here's the big thing. I could have made this a witch hunt, and I did not want to make this a witch hunt. Like, there were, when I put the initial call out, like there's a person who is well known in rail preservation, who I quote in the context of that episode, making a very sexist remark. And that was just me initially putting the survey out. And this person said that they believe that women do not have a place in the cab of a steam locomotive. I could have named that person. I could name that person here. And it's not that I'm afraid to. I mean, you could find this person if you're really looking. But that's not what I'm trying to do, because if I name them, then it's about trying to hunt down this person. We need to recognize that we are a collective. It's on all of us to make rail preservation a welcoming environment, and one that is supportive of diversity. And the more that we point fingers and say, oh, it's just these bad people, it's these bad actors, it's this organization's problem, we are cutting ourselves out from recognizing where we all can grow and where we're all united on this. Doesn't matter if it's a West Coast group and you're an East Coast group. Rail preservation is rail preservation. The more we think of it as a united front, I think the better we are. And so this was a particularly difficult subject to cover, and I'm glad that I did. It taught me a lot. I made friends through it. And I've received a lot of positive feedback. And I think it's important that we create a space where we can have difficult conversations. And as I said earlier, I'm not out to be an investigative journalist. I'm not out to get you. Again, I'm against the witch hunt mentality. My perspective is that we need to be working as a collective to make sure that we are being welcoming and that everybody could feel included. And so discussing setbacks is really difficult. And I get that. I get that, especially if you're representing an organization, it can be really uncomfortable to say, well, do we acknowledge that we didn't always do this and so forth? But if we don't talk about where things can be improved, we can't talk about how to improve those things, because we're not talking about where they can be improved in the first place. And so this leads to a constant reinvention of the wheel. I've seen problems arise over and over, where if there was a good resource out there to be able to address that, then we wouldn't find ourselves in this position repeatedly. And I know that this isn't just my perspective, because one of the recommended episodes I mentioned earlier is that of Dr. Robin Coombs. I had the pleasure of interviewing him in February of 2022, so a couple months ago as of recording this. I'd also interviewed him originally when he was just a photographer. This is his stunning image that you see in the lower right corner. But since the first interview, he went on to get a PhD from the University of Birmingham and Heritage Railways. He studied Heritage Railways, and I read his thesis, and then I interviewed him for the show. And there's so much out of that. A, I encourage you to listen to the episode. B, if you want a copy of the thesis, I'm more than happy to connect you to him, and then you can read the full thing for yourself. The two things that I think are worth sharing here is he emphasizes the need for rail preservation to develop an airline mentality. And what he means by that is that if something goes wrong, it's not about finger pointing. It's not about, okay, who are the bad actors? Who's the bad organization? It's about pinpointing, well, why did this happen? Well, because of this. Well, why did that happen? My former employer had what they called the 5 whys, that if something went wrong, you ask, well, why did it go wrong? Well, because of this. Well, why was that? Because of that. Well, why? Because of and you go back 5 steps. The second thing he emphasizes is that we need so much more research about how rail preservation works. And keep in mind, he researched the UK. And I think for a lot of us in the US, we look to the UK as the bastion of rail preservation. They've got it figured out. Oh, Heritage Railways all over the country. It's super tight and super coordinated, super awesome. And it is. But and he talks about where things are doing really well in preparation for the future. But he does note these gaps. And my feeling is, if we collectively in the US are say, well, the UK has it more together, and he's say, well, yes, the UK has it together, but there's still issues. There's things in reading that thesis that I feel like very much apply to the US. So I think that part of what my goal has become in recent history with the podcast is to try to talk about how we can improve as a collective. And I think that could go back to individual stories. I mentioned Kelly Lynch as one of the recommended episodes, and here's why. So Kelly is also a recent guest on the show. He was our March 2022 guest. And Kelly was phenomenal on a whole host of fronts. But what I really appreciated in particular, number one, I appreciated that he opened up about personal tragedies and why rail preservation was important to him in navigating that. But also because he comes out and he says, yes, Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society has a great reputation now. And yes, we are doing amazing things, but it was not like that when I got on. He talks about how when he initially entered the organization, there was some of that good old boy mentality, and he didn't always feel like part of the team, and how he actively worked to try to turn that around. And I think that's the type of conversation I really appreciate. Again, it's not to make anybody look bad. Nobody's going to think Fort Wayne looks bad just because 15 years ago they were struggling to make sure they had an inclusive environment. Nobody's going to think that. I'm certainly, if you're tuning into this and you're familiar with Nickel Plate 765, nobody's going to be thinking about that. They're going to be thinking about, here's what you're doing right now. And I really appreciate when people / representatives of organizations can get into the details more and talk about that progress. Remember this idea of storytelling? Storytelling is not just limited to these episodes or these videos or thinking about, a constructed narrative in communication. It's about thinking about how rail preservation exists, about the lived experience of rail preservation, both in terms of how we organize it, but also in terms of how we experience it as volunteers, as staff. So there's perhaps 3 points I want to leave you with when it comes to this idea of storytelling. Remember how we talked about this notion that characters undergo arcs, that a good story has a character that's undergoing some kind of arc? Why is a story mentality important in rail preservation? I see these as 3 key pieces that I think we can all think about. Number one, people want to be doing good. People want to feel that they have something to contribute. So the question I put out there for you, whether you're in a leadership position with a nonprofit or a business tourist railroad or whatever, the question I put out is, are you opening the door for volunteers or staff? Are you making that door open? And are you making them aware of the opportunities that you can provide? I see a lot of anti-foamer sentiment, and I get that. I get the frustration of that. But the question I pose to you is, if there's foamers in your area, are there ways that you can harness that energy that's constructive for everybody? Point number two, people want to know where they're going. I mean, we're rail fans. You get on a train, you know where you want to go. And why should it be different when we think about our personal journeys and how we want to grow? This is something that I see overlooked a great deal when I look at different historical websites, historical societies, or volunteer run tourist railroads, volunteer run museums, is that they'll say, we want volunteers. But the question I pose to you is, what can you guarantee your volunteers or your employees? How will you help them grow? Another way, perhaps, of thinking of it is, ask not what the volunteer can do for your organization. Ask what the organization can do for the volunteer. Point number three, people want to feel included. I think we can all say we want to feel like we're part of a team in some capacity. And it's easy to say, well, if you become a member, then you're a member, then you're part of things. But I don't think it's that cut and dry. I appreciate those who understand that it's about making you feel like you belong. Here's a story I have, a very recent story based on personal experience and not rail reservation specific, but I think there's lessons from this. Within the past month, I've started volunteering at a local humane society. I go multiple times a week and walk dogs, usually about for an hour at a time. And as I say, I've been doing this for about a month. And a couple of days ago, one of the staff comes up with this box full of leashes and says, okay, Nick, you get to pick your leash. And this will be your leash, and we'll have a spot on this pegboard in one of the rooms where you can put your leash. And it has my name there. It's not, it's not like a huge plaque. It's not embossed in gold, but it's just a little paper with Nick written on it. But do you know how special that makes me feel? That these guys recognize what I'm doing and now see me as part of their volunteer team. The gestures you could do for your volunteers don't have to be large, but whatever you could do to make them feel that they're part of something is really important. I end every episode of The Roundhouse by saying, the Roundhouse is our house, because my goal with the show is to create an inclusive environment in which we can have discussions of all kinds to learn how we can grow, whether it be something that's directly pertaining to our interests, like books, or maybe something that's a bit more niche. But I think that there's so much that we can learn from exploring these sub niches, and so much we can learn from these stories. And it's so rewarding when I know that this makes a difference. And I know that this makes a difference for a number of reasons. I mean, many people have messaged support. I'm very thankful for those who subscribe on Patreon. But another story that reminds me that stories are driven by people, not machines. I think that's something to remember, because it's so easy to get caught up with the machines that we kind of forget about the people. Like, the machines wouldn't be doing anything if it weren't for the people behind them. And a recent experience of mine is a person came forward to me and they were telling me something. They were telling me significant issues that they were that they are perceiving with their workplace. Which is all I'll say about it is it's a paid workplace. They came forth and they said, I'm really concerned about these issues. And I asked this, I thank this person for communicating with me. And I asked them why. I mean, I'm a journalist, and I've never met this person in real life before. Why did they come to me? And they said, because you did the episode about women in rail preservation, and I felt like you were somebody who cares about this. And that is what I hope this is about, is connecting with people in meaningful ways, connecting other people with other people, so that the Roundhouse really is our house, and that rail preservation is for everybody in some capacity. All of the links, everything I've mentioned, from the YouTube channel with the At the Rail Yard content to the Roundhouse podcast, I didn't want to inundate you with links. So I've taken the liberty of creating a link tree. So if you go to linktr.ee or Google search Linktree /Nick Ozerek, then you will see links for everything, including the recommended episodes that you should check out. The link to the website's there, so you are free to contact me through the roundhousepodcast.com. It's been a pleasure talking with you tonight, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Nick. That was a wonderful presentation, and I definitely greatly appreciate all the different perspectives you've been able to gather and bring to us. As a volunteer based organization ourselves, I think there's a lot to learn from other people's mixed experiences in rail preservation. So thank you.
My pleasure. And to be clear, so much positive as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you have to acknowledge the bad with the good to move everyone forward.
Yes.
I just have a couple questions here in the Q&A box from Brian. It says, what would you say to somebody who's starting out on a train layout who loves trains?
Well, I would say I've got a series for that I didn't even talk about in this presentation. But if you go to the YouTube channel in the link tree, or YouTube search Nick Ozerek, I've started a new series called What Makes This Layout Great. And to me, model railroading is so much about this idea of we have this personal attachment to different elements of railroading, and we want to encapsulate how we feel about that in our basement. Sometimes that's just about collecting the cool things, having our challengers and our big boys. And sometimes that's about operations and doing a mile for mile accurate as possible in a basement, recreation of short lines. So that's a series that I've started. So I encourage you to subscribe on YouTube, because I'm looking at different size train layouts and analyzing how they work operationally, using train simulator technology. So I'll take a track plan, build it in the train simulator, and then recreate it, and then play with it. And the advantage of that is that this is for Trains with a Z railroad simulator. The latest version is Train Z22. And the advantage of this is then these layouts that I'm creating, you can watch the videos of them, but I'm also releasing them for free. Which means that then if you have the game, you can play with the layout. Actually, relevant to Tri-State, a name that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I've had the pleasure of being commissioned by Mr. Rudy Garbley to build his his Conrail P&L secondary layout in the sim to help him visualize scenery. So that's my self promotion plug. Outside of that, I think it's just my general advice is think about what grabs you the most in terms of railroading, what you feel the strongest attachment to, because obviously you're going to invest money in that. So you want it to be something where it's like, I know I have a track record, pun partially intended, with this thing. And so I want to keep engaging with that.
Cool. Thank you. One of the best quotes I ever heard about model railroading and about other things in this vocation, as Kevin Fallon calls it, Dennis Livesey in our show says, everything we do, from the models we build to the pictures we take, is all trying to recapture that one moment we had when we saw a train for the first time and said, wow. And so I think your model railroad really needs to start there, is capture what it is that you like about trains.
And recognizing that the work you do builds, the more you share, the more it builds, because so many of us are influenced by those who came before us in some way. I mean, a prime example, you look at, obviously, Winston Link, you look at that. But the reason I mention him in this context is that my next episode of What Makes This Layout Great is a train layout inspired by different Winston Link scenes. It's all Norfolk and Western. The layout's called Norfolk and Western in the 50s. So it has mainline, it has Abingdon branch. And so you figure here's a layout that was inspired by the Links material. And then I was inspired by a model railroad article about the layout, about the Link material. And I hope that when somebody plays with the virtual train layout I've created, that somebody's inspired by that. So much of what we do, when we're sharing that publicly, can inspire others. And I think that holds true, whether it be the arts, whether it be holds true for model railroading, but even preservation. So many of us are inspired by the greats, the people who paved the way in preservation. And I think it's too tempting to look at others and say, oh, that person achieves great things and I could never do that. Don't sell yourself short, because they had to be inspired by something too. All of our work builds off of somebody else's.
Speaking of Rudy, he left you a question. It says, you mentioned a lot of your resume at the intro, but can you briefly summarize your recent Twitch streaming project, which may also be of interest to your podcast listeners?
Yes, thank you for that, Rudy. He is referring to, as you could tell, I'm a creative person who likes to be involved with many things. What I'm about to mention is not primarily my creative endeavor. I'm happy to contribute to it. And that is the Twitch series called Railroaders Play Railroads Online, as presented by the Virtual Railroad Academy. And Casey, who's the creator of the show and the primary host, she is a real life locomotive engineer and fireman. And so she is using the game to talk about real railroading principles. And I serve as the co-host. I'm the guy running questions and interfacing with our viewers. Twitch, for those of you unfamiliar, so think like YouTube. It's a live streaming platform where you show up, and we host that show every Thursday. Nope, sorry, that's my other show. We host the show every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. I'll put that in the link tree as well, so that you can check that out. Again, that's called Railroaders Play Railroads Online. We've been having a lot of fun with that so far. We intend to have some pretty cool guests who are also real railroaders coming on the show. And it illustrates the wonderful educational power that these train simulators have. And Rudy is part of the crew of the fictional Ahsokan, Mohonk, and Western Railroad that we run in when we're hosting the show. So thank you for that, Rudy.
Cool. Question from Nick Martin. What kind of characteristics do you look for when you're selecting an interview subject? Are there any particular boxes you like to have checks, or is it more of an instinctual process?
I would say that it's both, Nick. I feel like there's some of it is, if a group has a reputation or they've appeared in the news because of something exciting, then yeah, that's going to catch my attention, and I'm going to try to give it coverage, especially if I feel like shining a light on it could help in some way in a longer format that maybe just an initial press release might cover. as but it really varies. So some of it is in my mind. There's elements of, I hope this person could talk about this thing and that thing and go here and cover this territory. But sometimes it is just, this seems like it could be interesting, and let's see what happens. Prime example being that my April episode, which will be released for the full public this coming Tuesday, is of a new age artist who did a cross-country Amtrak trip and created her latest album on the train, including sending out like emails to get collaborators to email parts to her and assemble this album on a series of train trips. She did like the Lakeshore Limited, Cal Zephyr, Coast Early, Southwest Chief, Lakeshore Limited circuit. So she talks about the process of that, and that was sort of that was an out there one, because obviously how many of us are thinking of new age music when we're thinking of trains, but it struck me as interesting. It struck me as different, and that's what I like to celebrate. So it's a mixture of things, Nick. Thank you.
Cool. That looks to be the end of the questions, but we did have a comment from Veronica. It says, thank you for a very enjoyable presentation, and thank you for helping out the doggies.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, Nick, this is Mike. I'm impressed by your admiration of Winston Link, and if you want something interesting to look at, there was a movie in the 1990s called October Sky.
Yep.
I was a consultant on that film, and when the director told me that he was a big fan of Winston Link and he's basing his scenes on it, he was looking for locations that would imitate that. I said, I told him I would tell Winston, because I was very friendly with Winston Link. I said, I'll let Winston know, he'll get a kick out of it. So he wanted to talk to Winston. So he connected with Winston. The next thing you know, Winston is flying down there, and he did a cameo in the film, and had a lot to do with the overall look of the movie. So it's really a neat little souvenir of the Link era, so.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Mike. I know that you mentioned that you were good friends with him when Lindsay was on the show. I mean, truth be told, I live in Central Virginia now. I feel like I have to become an N&W Rail fan. Like, I feel like it's like a rite of passage to, you must like the N&W. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, what about the C? Look, I get it. Clifton Forge isn't too far away.
You mentioned the First Love business. That's why Winston did the N&W. His first trip there on assignment, he saw the N&W first. I remember sitting with him in a diner once down there as he was recovering from his heart troubles, and his caregiver took him for a ride, and he saw the Virginia, the big bridges and everything. I'm sure glad I didn't know about that then.
Yeah. I mean, what's remarkable with him, I mean, it's so hard to talk about it without going into cliches, but the more that I researched it, because when I moved here, I got as many of the books and read as many of the books as I could. And it's evident, been to the museum, it's evident how ahead of his time he was. Not just the techniques, not just the night photography. Yes, that too. But I feel like he was trying to grapple with this idea of preservation and of atmosphere, and how do you recreate that? I really wonder, I really have to wonder, like, what would, if he were alive today, like, what would he be thinking of these train simulator technologies, and how much the internet has grown, and what would he be doing with that?
Well,
it's a really interesting point to ponder.
He would love today's night work, the stuff that people are doing with the floodlights and the electronic flashes, and what digital photography would do. And he was very supportive of the up and comers, and even my own night shots. He really liked that stuff. As for train sim, I don't know, but he appreciated all the efforts that everyone else was doing. He was flattered by people imitating his work. And he was and he would often write to people with just not being critical for critical sake, just encouraging people to look for lights and darks. Don't just you need your shadows. Use your shadows. He would offer advice like that. He wouldn't say, "Oh, you're awful," kind of thing. He was very encouraging.
That's really great to hear, and good that it's great that he embraced how many people were taking note of his work and using that to inspire themselves. And I feel like there's so much to be said for those who are understanding the importance of how it's not just about documenting the thing, but trying to recreate the era and the atmosphere for those of us who weren't there, or maybe they themselves weren't there, but trying to bring it back. As a segue to your guest for next month, Rick Kafuri, his book, The Monadic Steamtown in Northern, where he's talking about F. Nelson Blount and how that got up and rolling and the early years. I'm not just saying this because Rick's a good guy, but I was really impressed by that book. I thought that he did such a great job of, as a reader, making me feel like I was back in the era and capturing what that must have been like to be one of the pioneers of rail preservation, or the idea of a tourist railroad or a railroad site. Great research, great photos. So you're in for a treat next month with him. And even right now, I'm reading a great book on the Auto Train Auto Train Corporation by Doug Riddell. And there too is another case where I feel like I'm back in the 1970s with the red, white, and purple streamliner, and this vision of a guy in his dream about what it would take to make this concept of transporting autos from Virginia to Florida work, a concept which obviously is still in place today. I love these things that make me feel like I'm in another place. It's, if I had to encapsulate like so much of what I'm pursuing, it's immersion. I love these different things that make me feel immersed, and I'm always intrigued by different books, train sims, videos, movies, pieces, layouts. I'm really fascinated by these things that are pursuing that immersion, because I think the best is yet to come. I know I was singing Steampunk Unlimited's praises earlier, but the bar's there in my book, but it can be excelled, and I look forward to seeing how we continue to excel it, including you guys with your Hickory Creek New York Central trips. I think that is such a really nifty service that you're providing, and it's great that it's clearly capturing the public's attention as well.
Well, your train sim efforts could be very impressive. I remember trying to encourage one of our younger fans who got interested in it into programming the old iron mine branches into it, and because now you can actually you're not limited by space like you are with the model railroad. You can do real lengths and mileages and distance between stations.
Well, I'm aware of a certain somebody in your organization who's really expert in, who's a huge expert in the Rahway Valley Railroad. Wouldn't it be nice, if one could like piece together, he's written some really good books too, but wouldn't it be nice to like see how all of these industries fit within one another and experiencing the dangers of having to cross that highway?
He's got a lot on his plate at the moment. So.
I know. I say
if you want to build it, Nick, I'll it's in my brain. So
yeah.
I'm confident it is, and I'm sure at some point it will manifest in some capacity. But that's the fun of it. I love seeing how different people take these things that they love to research, and it manifests in all kinds.
It's a shame we all have to make a living and keep the club moving, So
we actually did have another question come in from DH2s. It says, how do you decide what tone to use for an episode? How conscious are you about maintaining it?
Well, that's a good question. Tone. I think I want every episode to be approachable. I think that's the way that I look at it. if you listen to my interviews, I think there's times when I might come across as more, we'll say, NPR-ish and more straight down the middle, at other times where I'm more, I don't know about goofy, but more lighthearted and more lax. And I think it's so much just depending on kind of the atmosphere of the conversation. It's not to say one is better than the other. It's so, but I'd like to think that regardless of either approach, I'm making it approachable. One of my pet peeves with podcasts, because I love listening to other podcasts as well, but one of my pet peeves is when I feel like there's not enough of an awareness that the audience is part of this conversation. And I try to make sure that you, the listener, always feel like you're sitting at the table with me and this other person or this team of people. I want you to feel like you're there. And so different conversations have different atmospheres, but I always want them to be approachable. I never wanted to feel like so many podcasts are kind of these buddy shows where you've got the hosts that kind of know each other and the in jokes, and you come in, you know, on episode 300 and as a newcomer, you're thinking, I feel like an outsider because nobody's talking to me. Nobody's addressing that, hey, I'm a newcomer here. So that to me is important. Another piece of trying to make sure that people feel included and setting the right atmosphere is at the end of episodes, I always do a question of the day. So I will pose a question to the audience at the end of the episode, and I'll pose it through social media as well, and then collect those answers and share it in the next episode. In fact, this past episode with Kelly, the question was, what makes you feel included in a team? And I feel like that's important as well, because there too, there's this sense that, yeah, you're listening to a pre-recorded podcast, you're listening to something that happened in the past, but I want you to feel like you're just sitting down with us for the first time and you're just a silent observer, but even not silent, because you're welcome to participate in question of the day, and you're welcome to reach out to me and say, hey, Nick, you should totally cover this subject, this thing. Hey, we've got this really exciting announcement that we'd like to share with people. Can you would you interview our president or whomever so that when we announce this thing that the Roundhouse can be part of that. So hopefully that answers your question, but thank you very much.
Cool. That looks like the end of the questions. We had a lot of nice compliments in the chat for your presentation, Nick. Everyone seems to be really, really happy. So you did a great job.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you all tonight. I thank you for hosting me and allowing me a platform to share what I'm doing. I like having fun, and I like helping. I hope that what I'm doing is helping other people have fun too.
Yeah, and however Tri-State can support you, or if you want to help Tri-State, doors always open.
Sounds good to me.
All right, everybody.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. And all right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight. We greatly appreciate you attending. Next month's meeting will be Rick Kafori, as was mentioned, with Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern. So we're greatly looking forward to that. And then the June meeting will be my own presentation. And that will be at the Lake Hopatcong Station in Landing, New Jersey, with a virtual option here on Zoom. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.